So if you could go back in time, would you either vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
Donald Trump.
And why would you do that?
Well, the democratic process requires that we vote for people in the primaries, right? And they get on the ballot, and then we actually vote for them, like as the general election. And the way Kamala got into the primaries in the first place was by some bureaucratic thing that happened at the top of the Democratic Party, rather than people actually voting her in, right? They voted Biden in, and then when he became ill of health, he stepped down, and then they just appointed Kamala, right?
Yeah, so I guess my response to this would be we did vote in Kamala Harris, and the reason we did is because we voted in the primaries for the Biden-Harris ticket. So if Biden steps down at any point, Harris would step up. That's the democratic process to me.
Right. So she was the
vice president.
She was going to be the vice president, what you're saying.
So not only was she the vice president, but she was also the vice president on the ticket. So again, if we vote for a president and a vice president on a ticket, we know that if the president steps down, the vice president steps up, and I don't think in any other circumstance we'd consider that undemocratic.
No, I think so. I know there was some president a while ago where we had two rapid presidents, and so we had a president that was a vice president of a vice president. Does that sound familiar at all? And like we didn't actually vote for him. Does that?
I'd have to look and see if there was a vice president of a vice president, but like we know that in the situation where there's the first vice president, at least that in that circumstance they were voted on the ticket. So at least to me that would be democratic. But to you, I guess say it were democratic, would you still support Donald Trump over Kamala Harris?
I have generally other disagreements with the Democratic Party regarding at least abortion. I'm pro-life, not pro-choice. What's the other thing? I am pro two genders plus some, very rare medical exceptions as opposed to infinite genders, right? So, so I voted for Trump this election, but I actually voted for Biden in the previous election because I was ticked at Trump from the election before for kind of how he handled things. Generally, that was purely feelings wise, right? If you were to ask my brother, he would give you some long political reason why he might have voted one way or the other. But, as far as your question was, would I vote for Kamala based on knowing that she was going to be the vice president? That's what you were saying, right?
Knowing that she was going to be the president, right? If the presidential candidate, either Trump or Harris, who would you vote for? It seems like you said that because of abortion, you would lean towards Trump. Yeah. And I guess I would ask you, do you think abortion should be banned?
I would say it should be banned except in cases of, or was it just, I think it was just
life of the mother. I'm assuming those are the conditions.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've probably heard that argument before.
Yeah, so I guess here's my question. Would you be okay with, so here's essentially the difference between their views. Kamala Harris was Roe versus Wade, which essentially means that up till viability, it's federally protected in terms of legal access to abortion. And then after viability, it's left up to the states. For Trump, when he overturns Roe versus Wade, it's just left up to the states regardless. So it's leaving it up to the states without enshrining any federal exceptions in place. So would you be in support of that, given that it doesn't, enshrine any federal exceptions in place? Is there enough benefits that you see from that where you're willing to support that?
Roe v. Wade, sorry, let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. Roe v. Wade legalizes abortion up to a certain point. Mm-hmm. Yes. And what you're saying is that Trump did was remove the federal allowance to do it.
Yeah, so all Trump did was leave it up to the states. So it didn't enshrine any federal exceptions in place. So victims, they have restricted access to abortion in certain states. Life of the mother can have restricted access to abortion in certain states, or even in cases of. So given that that's the case, given that they didn't enshrine those federal protections into law, would you say that you would be more in support of, say, Roe versus Wade, given that it would allow for you to then, create conditions to then create a federal exception before then you decide to start banning it in those elective circumstances?
Well, I guess one of my big problems with, Roe v. Wade is abortion is okay up to a certain point. Now, you just asked me, would I be okay Ask your question again.
I got you. Don't worry. So essentially the distinction is that if Kamala Harris were president, Roe versus Wade would have stayed in place. So you would have had the ability to, before you ban abortion, put federal exceptions in place through Congress in order to ensure that victims have access to abortion in every state, regardless of whether or not you were to then put in place a ban in the first place. Secondly, under Trump, you don't have that ability because since he overturned Roe versus Wade and he left it up to the states, no federal exceptions were put into place before the legal ability to get access to it prior to viability was taken away.
Right,
so essentially, they didn't create the exceptions prior to overturning Roe versus Wade. Given that you do agree with those exceptions, would you then say that you would maybe be more in support of Roe versus Wade staying in place until you can put the federal exceptions in law so that, any victims in this country wouldn't have restricted access to abortion?
Right. That's what I was thinking. So the issue is a freedom issue, right? Is by mandating that certain states allow certain things, it introduces just the beginning of a slippery slope. Right, is I should be allowed to decide, right, me versus someone in Nevada or someone in, right, they should be allowed to decide for themselves whether or not they think a victim should get those benefits, I believe, right? They should be allowed that right. And so by federally protecting certain things, right, we really have to be really careful about what freedoms we take away from us and give to the federal government. We have to be really certain that those freedoms are things that actually universal, right? For something so contested as abortion is, I wouldn't be comfortable allowing the federal government to just say, you know what, everyone has to. It's similar with the, same-sex marriages. There's this whole thing where, should a parishioner be allowed to refuse a same-sex marriage? Like, they don't want to have to perform it, right? The idea in my mind of these federally requiring some states to do this is that a doctor would be federally required by law to perform an abortion that he feels like he's a human soul, whereas someone else is like, oh, what are you talking about? It's a cluster of cells. It's a zygote. It's whatever they say, right? So in my mind, it's a freedom issue, not necessarily a when is the, because they were okay and because it's, it doesn't really matter what you think. If you think because they're okay, or if you think it's because wherever you rest on it, you should be allowed to decide or at least vote for yourself.
Well, then why wouldn't you say that it's good that they federally protected people's freedom to get access to abortion or to not get access to abortion? Because that's a federal protection of freedom. It's not saying that the federal government, you have to do this. It's saying federal protection for you can get access to this. And it's not necessarily even saying that abortion providers have to, or doctors have to provide an abortion or something like that, or they have to do an abortion. It's that there will be abortion providers within, around them for them to be able to get legal access to. So it's about the freedom to protect people to make that decision for themselves. And you could say that you disagree with abortion, but shouldn't people have the right to make that decision for themselves rather than having the state restrict them from being able to do that?
I mean, the freedom to have an abortion versus the freedom to choose not to provide an abortion, like what you just said, is still restricting the right to not provide an abortion, right?
No. I was saying that people would still have the right to not provide an abortion if they don't want to, just that there would be legal access and other providers would be able to legally provide access to abortion.
Right. However, if it is the case that no providers want to do an abortion, then theoretically you would have to apply a federal mandate and require someone to provide that service in order to actually provide this freedom of being able to have an abortion.
Sure,
right?
if there were if there were no
So
doctors
what
willing
you're
to get an
saying is
abortion.
there's lots of doctors out there that are willing to provide an abortion. And so, but my point is there can be doctors that are allowed to, and there can be doctors that aren't allowed to anyway. Right? You don't need that federal protection to have doctors that are allowed to provide abortions.
I think you're misunderstanding the federal protection. The federal protection is for people to legally be able to get an abortion, not that people who are doctors have to provide an abortion for someone if they ask for it. The situation you brought up with same-sex marriage, for example, I think that actually can be reducted very easily. Do you think that should be true for interracial marriage, that they should leave interracial marriage up to the states and that some providers don't have to provide it, marriage for, or uphold a marriage that is interracial marriage if they don't agree with it?
So I am pro individual rights, right? So when you say leave it up to the states, I would even say I don't want to leave it up to the states. I would prefer to leave it up to the individual, right? I don't want the state to impose you must do this or you must not do that.
But you'd be okay with a certain provider not providing access to a marriage license for an interracial couple?
If they didn't want to, that is their right to not do that.
Isn't that against the Civil Rights Act?
Isn't that against the Civil Rights Act? The right. So the question is, right, when we talk about racism, it's a whole different story, right? That's why I had started on same-sex marriage as opposed to racism. Right.
Sure, but I was just saying essentially the same conditions that you're applying there to same-sex marriage could also be applied to interracial marriage. And that's also why, we would say, when we're talking about the law, we're setting precedents for the different types of freedoms people should have. And I say it creates more individual freedom to say that they should have to provide this for people, because it is the case that it ensures that everyone has adequate access to marriage, especially because there are legal implications to not being able to get married. And there are legal implications when you do get married. So I think in those contexts, there should be, providers that provide those things. And if there's a racist that doesn't want to provide it, I really don't care that their freedom is violated as a racist who wanted to be racist, right? I don't really have an issue with that.
I mean, my problem is that you should have an issue with that.
Why?
I think there is freedoms for the populace, and then there's freedoms for other people. And just because now we say, oh, we're not respecting the freedoms of these, in this case, we're talking about the pastors that don't want to provide these marriages, right? We're restricting these pastors' marriages or their freedoms so that we can allow freedoms for the Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. But there's also nothing let's say the entire state of Utah, no one here wanted to perform a same-sex marriage. There's nothing stopping from these two men that are madly in love driving to Las Vegas. Is there?
Should they have to, though?
Should they have?
The same conditions you're applying right now. I know you don't want to talk about it in terms of the Civil Rights Act, but the point I'm saying is that your argument here is actually against the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act literally forces providers to provide it in situations in which they disagree with it because they're racist. So would you advocate to get rid of the Civil Rights Act?
So the Civil Rights Act is that it restricts, it mandates that the states provide certain allowances to everyone regardless of race, sex, or class.
I think the extra connotations were added on top of it, but the general idea for the Civil Rights Act was in the context of race. But I think that even in the text it does say that, so you might be right with that, actually. So, I'd have to go back and check.
In the case of the Civil Rights Act, it was added. There's already an allowance in the Constitution that says you shouldn't restrict someone's freedoms based on these things, right?
What freedoms? Because there are certain freedoms we do restrict all the time. You said that we should have certain states bans for abortion. That's a restriction of freedom. Or we restrict people's freedom specifically to engage in actions that we consider illegal, right? We think that they shouldn't be able to do that. They should be put in prison if they do that. So there are plenty of restrictions we have on human behavior. It's really about when you want to put those restrictions in place and when you don't, or when it makes sense to. And I would say that there's so many more negatives from not providing this access for everyone in our society, specifically in terms of same-sex marriage and in terms of interracial marriage and applying to other sorts of civil rights as well, that it wouldn't make sense for us to uphold the rights and the freedoms of the bigoted individuals rather than the individuals in our society who deserve to be cared for and taken care of.
Okay. Can you give me some examples of drawbacks for not providing abortion? That service specifically. Let's go back to abortion. The marriage thing, it's a little bit more wishy-washy as far as, we're not talking about lives there, as far as life and death, right? But as far as abortion is concerned, can you give me some what is the drawback for not providing abortion.
Yeah, there are going to be people that will die because they can't get access to abortion because their medical providers don't know whether or not they can provide the abortion in that circumstance because they don't know if they're actively dying at that moment. A lot of these abortion laws in different states say that they have to be actively dying. So if they have a, say, 50% chance of dying, they can't get it in that circumstance. And we think that if people have like a 50% chance of dying if they don't get access to an abortion, obviously they should be able to get access to that abortion, right?
I would say I agree. I would also say that I would expect a doctor to agree with that as well.
Exactly.
Which I would also expect in that case that a doctor would provide that service.
They might not, given that it risks the rest of their medical degree and license.
Ask your question again.
So it's essentially the point. I was saying that they might not be able to if they, given that it is the case that their medical license will be taken away from them. So if their medical license can be taken away from them, they might not perform the abortion in that circumstance. Maybe they would. Maybe there's some people out there that would risk their medical license to be able to provide an abortion for someone, but they might not. And that's the issue, is that it would complicate things for the individual to be able to get access to what we agree on is healthcare, right? Some people, again, you could consider it or whatnot, but the idea is, the point is that someone's going to die if they don't get access to this, and even a fetus could die in that circumstance. There are situations where even a fetus could die, they're not viable, but if the pregnant individual is not actively dying, then they can't get access to the abortion. And it would be illegal, and it would be considered, they would be prosecuted for it.
Why would you want an abortion if your life was not at risk? The one reason would be, right?
Well, I wouldn't just say that would be like a reason. Like, for example, I don't think abortion is wrong. I believe it's based on sentience, like a subjective experience, which doesn't happen until 20 through 24 weeks. So, like, for example, my girlfriend, if she got an abortion the first trimester, I would pay for it, actually. For example, like, do you think in that circumstance I should go to prison if I paid for my girlfriend's abortion?
I'll just take the most violent stance. Yes, you should go to prison.
I don't think you actually think that, though.
Well, the problem is I disagree with abortion, right? At conception, I believe that the potential for life there, right? If you've heard Bill Burr's thing on this, he mixes the batter for a cake and he pours it in the pan and he's about to put it in the oven. The oven's preheated and someone grabs the pan and throws it across the floor. They still ruined your cake. Even though it's not necessarily a cake yet.
That'd be an example of like someone else causing an abortion or forcing you to have an abortion when you didn't want to. If someone was trying to build a cake, right, or create a cake,
right, but if you
and then they did it to themselves, yeah, they would be fine with that, right? There's nothing wrong with that.
So the analogy works fine if we're looking at a cake because it's just
Sure.
a cake. But
Exactly.
The fact that a cake is actually the cake is going to be a human life, I would say that it's not okay because that human life...
It's actually already a human life. At the point of conception, it's a human life. I don't dispute that. Science indicates that to be true. But we don't value things just because they're cellularly speaking alive. Do you think that if there was an individual in someone's family and because they're still cellular alive, do you think it's wrong for them to pull the plug?
Right. It is a two-edged sword, isn't it?
So my point is, it's not just cellular life. I care about sentient life, a subjective experience. And from a religious perspective, people might see that as the soul. Right? But I mean, it's harder for, I guess, some people to determine if they believe in Christianity or whatnot. But the idea is that you believe in some level of separation of church and state. So it's going to be based on whatever you intuitively determine is going to be the best set of conditions for value. And we already do that for individuals that they're cellularly speaking alive. And yet we don't think it's pull the plug, which leads to the cellular death of them. But yet we already, from a medical perspective, indicated that they're dead. Which is dead from a medical perspective.
Right. Let me get at it this way. So I'm a statistician, or I'm taking statistics, right? That's what that's my major. Mm-hmm. And when you are doing a probability problem, a lot of times it's difficult to compute probabilities based on what is, but it's very easy to compute it based on what is not. So I'm going to approach this in this way. What I don't like about abortion is the idea that a woman could recreationally have and ignore all of the potential ways to stop having a baby, having a child that she's not ready for. There's birth control. There's birth control. You can make the guy wear, right? There's lots of things that she can do. And so what I would say I'm against is recreational, disposing of a baby because she's just, it's inconvenient to her, right? She has without protection, and she's now just trying to use the government to dodge the consequences. That is probably the thing that I hate the most. That's probably like my reason that I am not for abortion. So saying like, oh, but are you in favor of like pulling the plug because we're defining it as the soul? Like, I don't know. All I know is that I can't subscribe to allowing women to children when they could have prevented the child from coming into the world under bad circumstances in the first place.
Sure. I mean, if they use contraceptives, would they be able to get access to an abortion under your view then?
So they wouldn't need abortion, would they?
51% of abortions result from failed contraceptives.
Failed contraceptives.
So most abortions come from people utilizing contraceptives and then still getting pregnant.
So stepping even further back from that, I'm against recreational in general, right? So I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We don't condone recreational.
You don't think it should be illegal, right?
Don't think recreational should be illegal. So it's against God's commandments.
But it shouldn't be illegal, right?
It certainly does sound like it's illegal to God. So if I was to assign my personal values to the law, which I suppose theoretically everyone is doing, right? I would say that having personal should be illegal, even though I understand that's a violation of perhaps someone's rights, right?
Sure, then here's my question. Donald Trump is a serial adulterer, cheated on every single one of his wives. Do you think he should be in prison?
Do I think he should be in prison because he's a serial adulterer? Well, based on the laws we have now, I don't think he should be in prison because he
based upon your own
right.
prescriptions.
Based upon my own prescriptions. Based upon my own prescriptions. He has not subscribed to my values, right? He is not obedient to God's commandments in that respect. I have no right to impose my law upon him. However, if we were in a world where Christ was king here on earth, yeah, he would be in prison, probably.
Do you think he should be president?
Do I think he should be president? I don't think his activity disqualifies him from being a good businessman and also a good leader.
Okay, so then my point would be, is that then in both of the ways that you view it, it should be. You believe he should be in prison and you believe he should be president. So do you think he should be president from prison?
President from prison. So I didn't say he should be in prison, right?
Well, based on your moral prescriptions,
based on
right?
my moral prescriptions, he should be in prison, but he couldn't be president in prison, right? That
Sure.
would be impossible.
Well,
So
I mean,
that was
technically
not-
he could. You could make an Oval Office in prison, but the idea is that the same type of person you believe who should be president of the United States, or president of the United States, you also believe that person should be in prison. And I don't think that you'd say the same thing for Kamala Harris. Right? So then why would you prefer someone who should be in prison over Kamala Harris?
Because Kamala Harris represents other values that I don't like, right? Again, back to abortion. The fact that I like Donald Trump or I voted for him isn't because I value him as a person over Kamala Harris. It's because I value the ideals that Trump puts forth with regards to the platform of the Republican Party more than I value the Democratic things. The Democratic Party's values.
Yeah, so again, the idea would be then you do think that abortion should be illegal in circumstances in which, say, for example, people have elective abortion. So if my girlfriend got pregnant, we had consensually, obviously, and it is the case that she gets pregnant, and she just doesn't want to have the kid, and I pay for that abortion, should I go to prison?
So she just doesn't want to have the kid.
Yep.
So she could have just not had then, right?
Well, we're not going to do that, but
Well, why not?
because it's fun.
Because it's fun. Right. This hedonistic desire, right? To just have whatever you want.
In a committed relationship, though.